I welcome everybody who's attending this evening with us. It's wonderful that many of our guests tonight are outside the parish, and that's what this series is really all about, helping us come together. And I'm so delighted that as it evolves, it really is taking on the conversational tone that we were really interested in creating. The root of Converse, of course, is to live together and to share a life. And that's what this series is all about, and this evening will be about. So I'd like to lead us in prayer at this time. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, in this Easter season, a time of resurrection, renewal, and restored joy, we know that you delight in your people when we explore the deepest questions and search for answers that move us to wider horizons, even beyond our own areas of interest and expertise and knowledge. Bless us this evening. Bless Dr. McGill as we thank you for his presence. May his presentation and all of our speaker series become a meeting place and a bridge, not only between culture and faith, but a dwelling place of the risen Christ. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. So thank you, everybody, for being with us. I have a wonderful committee I'm working with, but we as committee members know it's really Mary Lou McLaughlin that is holding us together and helping us move forward. So I want to introduce Mary Lou McLaughlin at this time.
Thanks, Father Joe. And our committee thanks you for your guidance and encouragement to seek out speakers and programs that will share the light with our parishioners and all who are curious to learn about topics and issues that influence our church and ourselves. And thanks to Andy Parker and Rob Fallon for being committee members who are working behind the scenes to bring this to you, and to the other committee members, Steve Urbanski, Connie Savaggio, Dr. Jan Johnson, and Judge Nora Barry Fisher, and of course, Father Joe. So before introducing our esteemed guest speaker, may I remind you that our last presentation of the season will be held May 27th, when Bishop Joseph Shelton Fabre, Bishop of the Houma-Tupelo Diocese of Louisiana, will be our speaker. As has been mentioned, Bishop Fabre is the chair of the Ad Hoc Committee on Racism for the United States Conference on Catholic Bishops, and is a widely sought after speaker regarding a pastoral letter he released, Open Wide Your Hearts, the endearing call to love, his passionate appeal to love abundantly, as the letters call to endeavor for us to endeavor to be missionary disciples, carrying forth the message of fraternal charity and human dignity. We hope you'll join us on May 27th to welcome Bishop Fabre. And now for this evening. After hearing and reading a good bit about him, I sent a cold call email to Dr. Gerard McGill in January, telling him about our newly formed parish of St. Jude, the many initiatives established by our pastoral council, and Share the Light, our exciting new lecture period. Then boldly asking if he might consider being a guest speaker. To my huge surprise, just 2 hours later, I received his lovely response. Indeed, Mary Lou, I'd be pleased to assist you and Father Joe and your newly formed parish in any way possible. I was floored. Dr. McGill graduated with 2 bachelor's degrees and 1 master's, summa cum laude, in theological bioethics and historical theology from the Gregorian Institute in Rome. And in 1987, graduated with a doctorate of philosophy in theology and theological studies from Edinburgh University in Scotland. That year, he continued his scholarly career at St. Louis University, where he was appointed chair, and then in 1999, the executive director of their Center for Healthcare Ethics. In 2007, he was recruited to Duquesne University, where he holds the distinguished Vernon F. Gallagher Chair for the Integration of Science, Theology, Philosophy, and Law, while being a senior research fellow in the Carl F. Griffinstead Center for Ethics in Science, Theology, and Law, focusing on data ethics and digital technology. Dr. McGill has written or co-authored or edited more than 13 books, and according to his CV online, he's a member of 14 professional organizations, including the International Institute for Theological Encounter with Science and Theology, the Society of Christian Ethics, and the American Academy of Religion. And he has given more than 200 scholarly presentations at conferences, and he answered my email in 2 hours. Please join me in welcoming our most gracious speaker, who will give us a tutorial in the ethical relationships of artificial intelligence in our lives and in the church. Dr. Jared McGill, who my husband Ish would recognize as a gentleman and a scholar. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mary Lou. That's very kind of you. My dead mother of many decades ago would be thrilled to hear such lovely words of her son, so thank you. And Father Joe, I really appreciate your very warm welcome into the committee. Thanks, everyone. And above all, thanks to everyone who's participating tonight. You'll get used to my Scottish accent. The intonation comes slowly across and you'll get, you'll be able to understand it a little better after a few moments. What you'll find is that there is something missing on this slide that you're watching about my identity. That's an academic identifier. There is one piece that I want to mention to you. I was saying to my wife just last Thursday, I taught my final class of the season. And it was when I come home, when I finished, come off Zoom and said to my wife, let's relax, have a glass of wine. She said, you do know what today is? And I said, the end of the semester. She said, no. This is your 45th anniversary as a professor in Catholic colleges.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
It really was something. And why I want to say that is what's missing from the screen is that I am a scholar of the Catholic ethical tradition. So that's what I do. I present the theology of Catholic teaching. I try to make it munchable, user-friendly, and understandable. And what you'll see tonight, I hope, is some of this surprising pieces of Catholic teaching that often go under-explained, and I want to clarify some of them for you. So if you see me being very enthusiastic and passionate, then you're just joining the train of 45 years. So thank you for being here.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk about these points in this slide. I'll go through each of them. We'll spend a couple of minutes on each one, and then we're going to have a lot of conversation at the end. I hope each one is going to ring bells and raise questions. Let me begin with the background. I'm wanting to give you a big context for understanding how the Catholic tradition deals with technology, and especially AI technology. So let me tell you a story. You know this story of Adam and Eve, fall and redemption. And that's a story of playing God, where Adam just overreached, and it caused the fall that we don't quite understand, but it's part of the mystery with which our religion, our faith tradition works. The focus of redemption is just as important. And the amazing thing is the words of Jesus in the New Testament, when he said, you, my followers, will be able to do far more than I have ever been able to do. There's an amazing call to bring that capacity of human dignity forward, not playing God, but using all the resources to celebrate and honor God. One thing that you also know is that we in ethics and, broadly speaking, rely on reason a great deal. But I want you to be a little bit cautious as we go through this conversation tonight, that reason is wonderful, but there's something more important than reason. And so let me give you a little example. If you imagine a train flying down the railway at 70 miles an hour and a little fly coming the other way at 5 miles an hour and they crash, the fly goes from 5 to 4 to 3 and suddenly is going at 70, right? So logically, using deductive reasoning, the fly has gone from 5 to 4 to 3 to 0 to 70. but it goes through the point zero because the poor little thing is now splattered on the windscreen. But if the fly is on the windscreen at the front of the train and the fly is at zero, the windscreen is at zero and the front of the train's at zero. Therefore, the fly has stopped the train, right? Mammoth is absolute nonsense. It's clearly utter rubbish. But that's the problem with narrow reasoning. It can lead us astray. It looks plausible, but in actual fact, dig a little deeper and there's more to it than that. And what I'm wanting to help you see that in Catholicism, indeed we rely on reason, and you'll see how much we do when I get to the science piece, but our belief relies much more on our imagination. Let me give you an example. When you were thinking of becoming a priest, Father Joe, or when Mary Lou, you were planning to get married, any of you thinking of those years back when we were falling in love, what was it that brought us to that level of certainty? There was lots of probabilities coming together and they accumulate to a point where we felt, yeah, quite sure. We couldn't prove it by logic. You couldn't say to your bridesmaid or your best man, I can prove this is the right decision. They might even have wanted you to have proven the opposite. But the point is, you got there. And at those altar rails when we married, and I say this to the young kids in class, if your spouse turns to you at the point of marriage and says, do you love me? Because of all these probabilities accumulating to the marriage, do you love me? The wrong answer is probably. Right? So the correct answer is yes, I do. I am certain. I love you. In other words, the imagination is a capacity that enables us to accumulate lots of complex pieces together into a meaningful point that yields certainty. And by the way, it's the imagination that lets us believe in our God, the imago Dei, the image of God. The imagination is what enables us to get to and reach and embrace God. Now, it's truly rational. Imagination is not a form of reasoning. It's not that. But it gives us images that enable our rational capacity or reasoning capabilities to coalesce to a point of meaning, to yield something that is seemingly inescapable, but it's very practical. And you just think about marriage again and the belief in God, how much our entire lives revolve around those two decisions, those two commitments, functions of the imagination. And we're going to get to that as we go through further in our piece today. I'm going to show you how technology affects start and end of life issues. You know, for example, we have a very strong tradition of anti-abortion in the Catholic Church. It is unflinching, it will not change. It is clear, it is straightforward, it's unambiguous. And yet there are many features about terminating fetal life that have got nothing to do with abortion because of modern technology. I'll give you an example here. I work in bioethics, where you have, these are called maternal-fetal conflicts. So for example, a cancerous womb. If a pregnant mother has a cancerous womb that has to be removed to treat her cancer, the Catholic Church permits that, even though the baby is going to die. There are tubal pregnancies and pulmonary hypertension are examples. In other words, the capability of modern science has forced the Catholic tradition to say you've got a strong teaching on pro-life for abortion, but the technology has to prod how far and what you mean by that. And the Catholic tradition turns back and says, listen, here is our tradition. We're a tradition not on the mountaintops. Other religions are. They have nothing but on the mountaintop principles that are non-negotiable. The Catholic Church lives in the concrete reality of messy life and says we will hold our principles tight, but we know where to draw lines between what is right and what is wrong. So that, for example, we will never permit an abortion. But on the other hand, if a mother who's got a cancerous womb is going to lose a child and die, then yes, we can embrace the technology and medicine of the modern day and let technology prevail there. So it's a small example of our very imaginative tradition. Our tradition has the imagination of saying both together that are both consistent and meaningful. Another example is frozen embryos and surrogacy. The Catholic Church has got a very, very strong teaching against surrogacy. That means when a husband and wife can't have a baby, they go to a third person, you know, a woman to carry the baby for them. That's called surrogacy. And because of the deep teaching of love and the unity of marriage and procreation in our tradition, that's completely wrong. Surrogacy is wrong. It's unambiguously, it's clearly wrong. Yet, the Vatican is currently considering permitting surrogacy in some situations. We, for example, in America, have got over 500 million frozen embryos in cryopreservation tanks that will die because they came from IVF clinics and their original parents don't want them, they don't need them, they're called spare embryos. And they will die eventually. Cryopreservation can't keep them alive forever. But what we can do now is salvage those embryos. They're basically 5-day blastocysts, now frozen. If they thaw out, they will die. But a 5-day blastocyst can be implanted into a donor woman and be given life, a pro-life tradition. So the Catholic Church is saying, well, in this case, where the husband and wife, the original husband and wife have gone, they've discarded this embryo, a third person comes along, this woman comes along and says, I am willing to early adopt this embryo by having this embryo placed in my womb, and I will give birth, gestate and give birth, and I will look after that child. Now, the Vatican is looking at that very seriously. It's going to be years before it would make a decision. And when I've asked very conservative cardinals about that issue, I get a consistent response. Jerry, that's exactly what the Catholic Church does. It develops, it goes with science. Of course, we're going to look at that very seriously. Again, a mark of the imagination. One thing is clearly wrong, surrogacy in relationship to IVF parents wanting to have a baby. But in this case of early adoption, the embryo baby is going to die and can be rescued. So it's rescue ethics. It's not IVF ethics, it's rescue ethics. Another example of imagination. This is the Imago Dei, the image of God. It's showing the dignity of life and how we can rescue life in all sorts of different ways. Let me go to the end of life cycle. That we can love life all the way through the last breath of dying. You saw the very famous case years ago of Terri Schiavo in persistent vegetative state, and how the Catholic Church wants to help and assist and enable people to have that death in a manner that doesn't have to straddle, being hooked up the way Terri Schiavo had been hooked up for 15 years. The Catholic Church does permit withdrawal of life in those very difficult circumstances, given certain conditions. Again, it's a wonderful example of the imagination. We saw Terri in a bed, hooked up as a PVS patient for 15 years. And the imagination of the church said, look, we've got to do something to deal with that and figure that out better than perhaps we've done in the past. Another wonderful example is what we're doing with end-of-life sustenance, with palliative and hospice care. The one thing you probably knew recently that assisted suicide and euthanasia are in Europe. And there are many countries in Europe that permit that. And it was the case that Netherlands, Holland, that nation was seen as a kind of leading field of euthanasia and assisted suicide. But the country that is now the dominant country in the world on assisted suicide is the United States. Look at all the states in our nation that permit assisted suicide. So the only way we can stop this crash of assisted suicide going through the states, we've got 6 states that permit it, we've got 22 states with legislatures considering assisted suicide, is that we've got in the Catholic Church to present an alternative, that you can die well. And our Catholic hospitals are doing that. They're developing these wonderful programs for palliative and hospice care to enable people to die extraordinarily well at the end, a peaceful passing, a loving life at the very last moment, the sanctification of human life. Now let me get to more recent times with pandemics and our little friend COVID, climate and catastrophe. Again, it's a very big change. What COVID forced us to do is the American mindset of medicine was all about autonomy and personal dignity, and you go in and you get the hospital to treat you. My students were shocked when I told them, forget that, as we moved into COVID a year ago. We are moving from the autonomy ethics, dignity of the individual, to population ethics. We're talking about triage here of the population. Now, the individual's always got to be safeguarded, always got to be protected, but we're moving into a different mindset. And it takes it takes quite a bit of an imagination to capture that mindset. Now, without COVID on our doorstep, it'd be very difficult for us to see it, but we did see it. We saw the need to take population measures. You might not like to wear a mask, but you wear a mask. You might not like a vaccination, but you get a vaccination. You get the idea. But COVID is a small problem. The good news about COVID is we've now got these genetic fixes that I'll talk about in a moment. The bad news about COVID is that we know its cause. It came from the deep forests in China. And it came through the bats that live in the deep forests in China. And in those deep forests, the bats are very lovely creatures because they munch all the munchables. They fly around at night and they munch all of these things that are carrying ferocious viruses, and they keep them away from us. But suddenly, because of climate change and deforestation, these bats are coming out of the deep forest and they're getting into other animals, and then other animals are passing diseases to us. So we know that COVID is a canary in the coal mine. The coal mine. In other words, we know that what caused this is the beginning of a much bigger problem because of climate change coming down. I'll tell you the good news about that story in a moment when we get to the vaccines. But the bad news is that climate is a terrible, terrible scourge that humanity has created this problem for our planet. And let me tell you something. Original sin is a terribly difficult thing to explain, the Adam and Eve story that I mentioned. But let me tell you what I think original sin might be. It's not just the story of our past. It's not just the story of Adam and Eve. It's not just the story of humanity's failure and then recovery with redemption. It's the story also of our future, that we may be so broken that we are unable to save our planet, that we are so determined, so willful, so greedy, so selfish that we are unable to save our planet. And if that happens, if our planet is ruined, if our species can go fast, we are a very, very vulnerable species. COVID is reminding us of that. And remember, with COVID, 3 million people have died across the globe. It's a lot. But remember in the Spanish flu, the flu in 1918, 1919, 20 million people died across the planet. Now, we're always just ahead. We've had all of these scourges across the planet, from smallpox and all of these things over the centuries, and we've always just been ahead. Science and technology has kept us going. But if we play with climate and ruin our planet, and we die as a species, it's perfectly possible. You know, it's a very interesting thing. The planet will recover. The power of nature to recover is phenomenal, and it will flourish without us. And the sad thing is that God's creation of our planet will be a golden light in the universe, only there'll be no more the human person. But we might be the cause of that, the Imago Dei, original sin, our past and our future. So let me get to genomics, and we're slowly getting to AI, but I'm trying to give you the big picture of technology. The genomics is helping us transform the world. We saw the whole genome sequence 20 years ago. We're doing amazing things today. What the Europeans are doing are different from the Americans at the moment. Maybe the Americans will catch up, but the Europeans, for example, at the moment are doing, you know, when a new baby is born, you get a heel stick to test for 27, 28 diseases and ailments. The Europeans have done away with the heel stick. They're now taking one jar of blood and taking the whole genome sequence of the baby and putting it into these amazing databases. And the idea is for the Europeans, twice the population of America, 600 million people, to have this database over 20, 30, 40, 50 years going forward, where their entire genome sequence is there. And the idea of that is to plan for future pandemics, to plan for future dreadful things so that we can counteract difficulties through that amazing amount of genetic gathering. And that's run by algorithms, what we'll get to in a moment. And we, with genetics, we can now edit the human genome. What we did with the vaccine, which I'm now going to talk about, is a matter of editing the human genome. If you're at your computer and you're writing a little letter and you want to change Mary for, if you want to change deer for pet, pet's a little kind of liver-puddly name of saying deer. You want to change that word, you put it in once, press it, and find insertion, it changes. It's just a click of a button. That's what CRISPR does. This amazing technology. It sends this message into your body. And remember where the cell lives in your body, where the gene lives in your body. It lives in your cell, and your cell is all over your body. So every single cell in your body has got your DNA. So when CRISPR comes into your body, it's got to find every cell, every DNA, then find a little letter, cut it out, and replace it. And it can do this. It's an amazing technology. But because of the dangers of it, there's a big control of it on it on embryos, so that it doesn't pass into the future population. Doing it on your own body as a somatic treatment will die with your body. But to do it on embryos, that would pass on to the next generation, and it would put the human species at risk. Because remember, it took 500 million years for the human species through Darwinism to get to where we are. They reckon if CRISPR goes awry into the germ line, it could be within 50 years that we would destroy the entire species. So you can see the dangers that we're playing with here. Now, before I get to digital technology and Pope Francis, I want to set it up by talking about the vaccine, the COVID vaccine. So the interesting thing about this vaccine that we're talking about today is that in the past, vaccines would take 8 years or so. The COVID vaccine, they said, took 8 months, a huge difference. And the reason for that was that these companies, big pharma companies, about a decade ago, decided to run a big gamble. They said, let's create a genetic vaccine. And they were laughed out of court. You cannot do a genetic vaccine. That's silly, that's outrageous. But those pharma companies knew they could. And they put in the building blocks for this capability in the event that something would happen in the future. Well, here we are 10 years later and something happened. COVID happened. So the Chinese, when they traced it, they did the sequencing and passed the sequencing out free across the globe. And we put that sequence into these building blocks and it generated the vaccine. And they say it took 8 months. Well, remember, most of those 8 months, 6 or 7 of those months were testing the vaccine. It didn't take 8 months to find the vaccine. It only took a matter of 2 or 3 weeks to find the vaccine. And then it took the longer time to test. Now, the good news about this breakthrough with the vaccine and this technology is if these bats come out with further pandemics in the future, we now know we can move very fast against them because we've got the technology to take their DNA, put it into a building block, create the vaccine and roll it out fast. And it will not even take us 8 months to roll it out because we now know these tests can be done in a much faster manner because of this experience. So we've got this firewall created by genetic vaccines for almost anything that can come forward. And that's an enormous silver lining and relief. The glorious thing about a genetic vaccine is it's not just DNA. It is digital technology. In other words, when our DNA was sequenced 20 years ago, it was going terribly slowly, terribly badly, until someone said, well, look, why not just leave the laboratory and start to use computers, data technology? And they did, and they solved the problem very, very fast. Fast forward 20 years, what's happened in the past 15 years? The iPhone. Data technology has taken off. It's now moving to 5G at enormous speeds and moving forward. So the capacity that these pharma companies have had to develop a genetic vaccine is not just genius DNA people, but genius mathematicians who are writing these algorithms. So now you know the general background of technology. And I just want to say a few things now about where we are with AI ethics in the Catholic Church, with Pope Francis in particular. When I started my career 45 years ago, it was actually with a very famous case of Karen Ann Quinlan, a very famous American case of someone who was a PBS patient. You probably remember that name going back to 1976. And for 45 years, my career has been based around end of life, matters. I train my students to go into hospitals to be ethics consultants at the end of life and so on. We've got this PhD program, the largest in the country, that trains our students in the Catholic ethos to go into hospitals to give this enormous service to help people die well. I am now morphing. I am now seeing something even more important than end-of-life ethics issues, and it's AI ethics. AI ethics is now going to become so pervasive across everything that we do, from simple things like using the iPhone to complex things like preparing a vaccine for the next pandemic that's coming down the road, to, robotics, to little computers, not just, driverless cars, but all sorts of robotics are going to do wonderful and amazing things. And like all immense technological breakthroughs, it's always a good and a bad. They can be abused, but we know that we can use them well. So Catholic ethics has embraced this. It's one of the first major world religions to take on board this as a very positive, constructive aspect of our life. And why? Because Catholicism and its faith, with its reason and imagination, is not fearful of science. Because Catholicism embraces the fact that God created us. And if we can have our reason and imagination deeply engage human nature through science and medicine, then we will better understand God's plan and celebrate and move that forward. So a couple of big things about why the Catholic Church wants to look at this, not just because it's a breakthrough in science, but because artificial intelligence and subset machine learning, where machines talk to and learn from each other, is not only helping pharma the way I'm after describing, but it's also immersing into our lives in a way that might be surprising. You've heard of HIPAA in terms of protecting your privacy, in terms of your medicine and your medical diagnoses and so on. Well, there's a backdoor to HIPAA that allows an organization to mine your data, provided it's for the good of the organization. In other words, if they mine that data, it will be given back to the organization to enable the organization to serve you better. And there's a rule with that backdoor in HIPAA that if an organization comes in and does that through another organization, then it's got to be the minimum amount of data necessary. Well, if you don't know this already, let me break the bad news to you. Every major healthcare organization in this country at the moment has opened that backdoor, and the major companies, Google and Apple, they are out now working with these enormous health systems to mine our data. And two things about it that you will not be surprised by. Number one, this backdoor, they are mining our data in a non-anonymized manner. So yes, they have all our personal information, because they say if we discover things, we'll give the data back to you, we're going to help you, so we need to know where the data belongs to the various patients. It's managed, it's secure, but it's not anonymized. And the second thing is the basic rule these big companies are saying to healthcare organizations. I know that the HIPAA backdoor says the minimum amount of data needed, but the minimum amount of data we need is all the data. So they're getting everything. And one last thing about it, and this might terrify the living daylights out of you, they're doing it for free. Why would Google and all these big companies be doing this for free? Of course they're going to help our healthcare organizations. I don't doubt that. I know it's honest, it's well-meaning. But can it be abused? Aha! Here we go to the Imago Dei, the technological imperative as heresy. Do we get to the point where we so adore technology that we forget that it has huge demands upon us, our responsibilities in terms of defending what is right and what is wrong? So I am really enthusiastic and enormously pleased to tell you, if any of you are not Catholic, forgive me for my passion for the Catholic tradition on this, but good old Pope Francis is leading the fray. He is charging ahead with great glee and ferocity. It's not that previous popes did not talk about this. They did. But Pope Francis is living at an age where it has exploded upon him. He realizes its significance, and he is really embracing it for the sake of saying, let us use our reasoning, use our faith, let's build an imagination together to see what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad. So he says there are three areas he wants the Catholic Church to focus on, not just the ethics that we're talking about, but also educating people about it so they're not fearful, they know how to use it, and also respecting rights in a manner that this is not going to disenfranchise or further jeopardize vulnerable people. And he's got 6 principles. I'm just going to run through these quickly and then we can talk. We need lots of time to talk. Of all of these pieces, you see inclusion and responsibility and so on. Transparency is going to be the biggest one of all. In other words, as these organizations engage with our data for purposes that are going to be, for the population, for the species. You see, we're moving not just with pandemics here from the individual to the population. We're moving with algorithms from the individual to the population. That shift is a very interesting shift of the imagination. It's very legitimate, but you've got to think about it in a way that allows that legitimacy to be seen, to be accountable, to be held really closely under the lens of ethics and responsibility. So with that, I'm going to say thank you to give us lots of time for conversation. I hope my enthusiasm for the grand Catholic tradition on science and imagination has inspired you. So let's use our imagination and we'll have free-flowing conversation. Rob, you can maybe give us some guidance on that.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much. It's a very stimulating series, a panoply of ideas, a big framework. And I think a lot of us might be interested in applying to your program ourselves because this is really just incredibly relevant, very stimulating, as you said. This is really beautiful. So thank you for the talk. I'd like to make it clear that the way we're going to handle our question and answers is that any of you can chime in, unmute yourself, and ask away. I will try to help to moderate, and I'll have a question or two of my own. But if you have something that you'd like to ask Dr. McGill to clarify or to elaborate on, or a comment about his talk, feel free right now, chime in. Yours is the floor. Anybody?
I could.
So, yeah, I would like to ask a question, Dr. McGill. First of all, congratulations on your anniversary of the 45 years. And you certainly have spoken well in the tradition, so thank you for that. But with things happening so rapidly just so fast, sometimes to have conversations around the whole subject is so difficult because we can't even maybe define things yet together. How do you recommend that we enter into those kinds of conversations, the church with others about everything that you've touched upon tonight?
Good question.
Yeah, basically, Father Joe, thank you for that. It's a question I get often, and there are basically it's three pieces together that we want to hold. The first piece is for us not to underestimate Church Central, the Vatican and Church Central. What it's doing, it's got limited resources, we know that, but it's always ahead of the game. It's always attentive to what's coming down the pike, to be prepared, to be ready, to give leadership, to give pastoral leadership, to give theological leadership, and to give political leadership to nations around the world. That gives us great peace of mind that we know that our Church Central is looking at this with enormous clarity and strategic intention. The second piece is for us to ourselves become knowledgeable and inspire people to say, to find out more and not to be fearful of science in itself, to be critical indeed, but to be aware that our church is a science-based church. Our church is a nature-based church. Our church is a fact-based church. It doesn't believe in some of the kind of silly kind of sideline things that people say and make up and obfuscate what the church calls truth. In other words, when we talk about this among ourselves and we try to deepen it, celebrate the word truth. Truth matters. Catholic doctrine is based on truth. Our faith is based on truth. Truth is celebrated in our tradition and should never be yielded or played around with or played foots with at all lightly. And the last piece that I try to explain to people is yell loudly. Be proud. This is an amazing tradition we've got. We have every right to be in the rooftop shouting about it. We've got something to say. Don't hesitate. You might not know everything, but you know something. And it's oftentimes a lot more than somebody else knows. So always become the preacher.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions already here in the chat. I'll ask there's another one here. I'll ask the very first one from Teresa Thomas, from Catherine Ryan. Teresa, hopefully we'll get to you in a moment, who asks, how do you see the increase in technology among different age groups? Teenagers, middle-aged, the elderly. I'm not quite sure what the question means by that. And,
Right. That's an awareness piece that gets to what Father Joe was mentioning. How do we make people more aware of this? So we know the younger generation that they grow up with this. However, it's really important for us not to underestimate that they may not see it as clearly as they need to because they grow up with it. I mean, those of us who are more than 20 years old, who went through the old telephone and then went to the little hand mobile phone, and then you went to this amazing device that's not a phone. We use it as a phone, but it's more powerful than anything that went to the moon. Amazing that we can FaceTime. I FaceTime my family. One of the joys of COVID was I started to talk to my family more in Europe through FaceTime. It was, a side blessing of COVID. The idea that the younger generation are always going to manage and use this, that to me is a mistake. They will live with it. They will use it better than we can. They'll live with it and they'll be geniuses about it. But this is where I think the older generation, and I would say especially the elder generation, we have got the time. We're probably most of us retired. We've got the capacity to be thoughtful and deliberative, to ask the right questions, to nudge it forward. So there's this famous thing in Catholicism you've probably not heard about. It's called about generation responsibilities. So if you see power abuse in your company or whatever, typically it's a big ask to say to the young kid, look, you go and say to the boss that he's abusing his power, you get fired tomorrow. Or you go and say to, this generational challenge that Catholicism has always had is the elder generation has enormous responsibility to call people out. We've got nothing to lose. We're retired. We're getting our social security, for goodness sake. We have a right to speak out more boldly, to be more critical. We've not got a job to lose. And so I wouldn't underestimate that feature about AI technology that the elder generation really has to be. I would say we've got a bigger responsibility than most of the other generations to be attentive and to be alert and to speak out. And certainly if Pope Francis is saying that to us, that's when you read Fratelli Tutti and so on, he recognizes these generations and he's calling on the mature generation, the wise generation, to direct us and lead us forward.
Mm-hmm. Catherine, does that answer your question? I'm not sure I know who you are in front of me on screen. Chime in later if you need any follow-up on that.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, I left out the verb there. I meant, how do you see it impacting each of those different age groups? And I like your answer, Jerry, that the older generation needs to call out some of the abuses, the overuse, the dangers of this technology. We have one right now in our family where a lovely young woman who's dating our grandson has bought into this whole thing that the vaccine affects fertility and now she's afraid to get it and whatever, because she heard all this on social media. So, we're planning to call her out on it a little bit.
Truth matters. Yeah, the Catholic Church represents truth. Don't ever be shy of that.
That's right. So,
and that truth is often based on science. It's not only based on science, but very often the Church builds its doctrine on science.
Right. Okay. So thanks.
Wonderful. Teresa, are you available to ask your question out loud, or would you like me to read it for you from the chat? Teresa Thomas? You can unmute yourself if you'd like to speak.
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Go ahead, Judy.
Hi, thank you for a fantastic presentation. My question, which I wrote into the chat, I'm trying to put a 9-week-old to bed, was about AI ethics and, sort of what the Catholic philosophy can add to it. My big concern with AI and big data and data analytics is that it is very, it reduces people to data points. It reduces us to, things that are found in our records, on our phones, all of this, which really strips us from, our larger place, and as people that are made in the image and likeness of God. And so I would hope that as Catholics, we can add to the conversation, to call out some of the problems with AI in that regard. But I would love your thoughts on what we as Catholics can critique this movement about.
Yeah, so the piece that Pope Francis is leading us with, and the call from Rome is leading us with, is to remember that as we go into this enormous vortex of AI ethics and all of its complexities and mathematical nuances and algorithmic perspectives, is that human dignity matters. This is all very well if we're using algorithms playing with the DNA of a bat to get a COVID vaccine. But when we're dealing with the human species, there is something very sacred about that. This is the imagination again. That the Catholic Church believes in each person as being in the image of God, the imago Dei. We can't understand God. The mystery is too great. But if we want a glimpse into the mystery, if we want a glimpse through the portal of uncertainty to see what God is, look at each other. Look at the goodness we find. So that's the human dignity perspective. That's one thing. And that's related to civic liberties and human rights and so on. That's important. But it's really, the Catholic Church talks about human dignity and the sanctity of life because of that. And the other side is equally important. And Pope Francis is incredibly powerful on this, just as powerful as he is on human dignity. And all popes have done this too, but Francis is giving it a different spin, a different perspective, a different nuance. He's basically saying, listen, we're going to be known to do the right thing based on our respect for and treatment of the vulnerable. I know the vulnerable is a very big catchment area. In one sense, we're all vulnerable, but he's talking about very particular populations who are poor or uneducated or sick or disabled or cognitively impaired or just simply old and sick. That vulnerability is a condition of the human species. And the reason why it's so special to Pope Francis is because he sees it as a Christological characteristic. It was Christ's vulnerability that brought us redemption. So if we want to understand human dignity and understand we're made in the image of God, the Son of God, so to speak, in that biblical sense that Jesus Christ showed us so deeply, we've also got to understand the vulnerability of God's creation. That vulnerability caused us to go to the fall. It could cause us to ruin our species. It could lead to climate change that ruins the planet. We are a very, very vulnerable species. And we have to be attentive to that. And I think if those two things are found to be in balance, Pope Francis says, then we can go forward reliably with this technology. But both must be respected in all the details that they actually encounter.
Our very next question on the chat is from Michael. I certainly invite him to put it in his own words, but his question is in fact about the environment and climate change. Michael, are you there? Would you like to explain yourself, or would you like me to read what you wrote?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, and great presentation. Great topic. And I feel like you've kind of spoken on this too with some of your responses already, but I had not heard that the origin of COVID was from coming from bats was like a symptom of climate change. But I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on, the need to reverse the negative impacts on the environment, and when we have such bad actors that are kind of institutionalized, how we can kind of reverse that so that we don't continue to have negative consequences from man's actions on the environment.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, we're pretty sure that COVID is a direct result of climate change. And that's a surprising thing to say, but just draw the dots. It's a function of the imagination here, not just the logical pieces, but the imagination. Draw the dots. It was almost certain that the virus came from a bat through, transferred through another species, another animal. The idea of being a leak virus from one of these Chinese factories, they've done the inspections and it seems very unlikely. But even if it were true that happened, we know that these bats are carrying all these other viruses that they've given us in the past, these multiple viruses that have occurred. So we know the bats are a major transference of these viruses. So as I said to you earlier, don't blame the bats. The bats do a wonderful job for us. They are in these forests containing these diseases, munching merrily, keeping us all safe, keeping them in the forest. These deep, dark jungles are capable of all sorts of really dangerous stuff. Just think if you walk along one of those forest floors, how many friendly snakes you would meet. Most of them are extremely poisonous, or how many berries you could eat would kill you immediately. All right, you get the sense. But that's the tremendous variety of the planet, of human nature. So the idea then is, that if these bats are coming forward, it's because on the one hand of deforestation, and deforestation is also contributing to climate change. So you see them connected. So let me just go on from that, just make that assumption. I think it's a fairly reliable assumption. You can debate it in multiple ways, but at the end of the day, even if it's not true that this bat was a function of climate change, the bats carry these viruses, and these viruses are coming out of the forest because of climate change. So generally, the hypothesis is correct. The more important point is what Francis has done. I mean, just think what he has done as a pope. All popes come in and they do enormous self-identifying things. I mean, you go back to Leo XIII at the turn into the 20th century, giving us all those social doctrines about justice and so on. You go to the great Pope Pius the 12th in terms of breaking into the field of medical ethics and giving us all the basic guidelines about medical ethics before and during World War II. Then you've got, John the 23rd and Paul VI who gave us Vatican II. Then we have John Paul II, and then we have John Paul II, and then we have John Paul II for a long time. John Paul II, as far as I remember, lived longer than even Pius IX did in the 19th century, who gave us Vatican I. John Paul II did just enormous things in the Catholic Church. I mean, he popularized it in terms of his persona, in terms of a pastor, in terms of a papal diplomat across the globe. But his teachings, his ethical teachings, were erudite and deep. He brought things together, gave them meaning, gave them stability, anchored them. Extraordinary tour de force. And then followed by Pope Benedict, who was, basically the person who helped guide John Paul II in those writings, and Pope Benedict then led to Pope Francis. And Pope Francis, his MO is basically, he's an environmentalist. He's basically saying God, following Francis, Pope Francis, as in St. Francis, that God gave us this beautiful planet. Go and read Genesis. And God saw it to be very good, all of it. The story of Genesis, okay, the human is there, but it's only one of many, many things. And God saw it to be very good. So the planet is what Francis is celebrating. And I think he's doing that because he realizes the jeopardy. He realizes that the previous focus on the human responsibility towards society as a function within a planet, while it's very well stated, he's wanting to saying, I'm accepting all that and celebrating it, but we're moving on to something bigger now. We're wanting to focus our moral energies on the planet, on the environment, and how we've got to be accountable for that. Because if we don't look after the planet and the planet dies, then our species will be lost. The imago Dei on Earth will die in that sense, though the actual planet will survive and still be that beautiful blue ball in the sky. It will always be an honor to God. The planet without humanity will be an honor to God. It's just that we will have contaminated that honor by ruining the human species.
Dr. McGill, thank you. The next question here is very similar to one that I've been wondering. As a professor myself, and you certainly would have experienced this situation where we might teach one thing, but the students don't always follow. And so this next question gets at the heart of what we Catholics can do should we choose to follow. It's from Christy Galtieri. Would you like to ask that, Christy?
Sure, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you so much for this discussion. I was just sort of wondering in terms of, the average Catholic that is a parishioner in a church that sort of has some concerns about the ethical development of new technologies, whether that's, new medicines or whether it's, anything new. And because the conversations around this tend to move so fast, and sometimes the church, although Pope Francis is saying so much, can move more slowly, what would you suggest would be the most effective way for everyday Catholics who want to be able to have a voice in this discussion to be able to present that? Would you suggest going through the leadership? Is it something that parishioners should be in contact with their bishops about? Is it working and collaborating with bioethic committees? Which one do you think would make the most headway in the shortest amount of time, so that we also feel like we could have a real voice in this discussion in real time versus just sort of waiting for statements?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Where can we get maximum leverage? And I wouldn't worry too much about the pastor of the parish, or the bishop or the Episcopal Conference, or how they all relate around the world to Rome. That's pretty well all taken care of in a way that's behind the scenes. We don't see it very well. But there's so many people who know that system, and if it weren't working, they'd be jumping all over it. Not least the Vatican dicasteries. So the hierarchy of the Catholic Church is on this ball. It really is on it, and will stay on it. So that's a great relief. To me, the bigger question is how we work within our own circle. So it's like a pebble in we put a pebble into a can pond and you see the circles expanding out. what are our circles where we can have that influence and engage discussion? So basically, I very much believe in the small impact movement. In other words, try to influence people who are around us, our family, our friends, try to cajole them, get them to deepen their understanding, get them to do something that's active. And about what? Well, I would continually bring this back to just basically two things that Francis tells us all the time. With AI ethics, are we really respecting the human person? I mean, there's multiple ways you can come to that, but that's one aspect of the debate. If something happens, something new is happening, something else is going on. You know, for example, a big thing that's going out on data ethics just now is face recognition. Well, I mean, it's a very good thing and it can be a problematic thing. So have that conversation, but is it ultimately about respecting and protecting human dignity, especially the vulnerable? So that coin has got dignity in the front side and vulnerability in the other side. So that to me is the topic around which, that's one topic that I like to talk about. The AI ethics with regard to us as humans is about dignity and vulnerability. And then secondly, AI ethics about the planet, about ecology, about the environment. If we don't fix our problem, if we don't do something just now, I'm not talking 10 years, I'm not talking 5 years, I'm talking now. If we don't make change now, the cataclysmic changes that we thought were 100 years off are not. They're on our doorstep, they're happening. The floods are coming, the hurricanes are here. The storms are around us, the fires, the maelstroms, the forest fires, they're all around. We need to be blind and deaf to not understand that the planet is changing in front of our eyes. So to me, the critical thing is to leverage those small circles in the pool and get larger and larger around those two pieces. AI ethics regarding dignity and vulnerability, AI ethics regarding planetary safeguarding.
I did say that people should feel free to chime in without writing. And we have 3 more written questions, and I'm happy to get to them in turn if we have time. But in case somebody wanted to simply ask directly and you haven't written it in, let me open the door to that question now.
Okay, Doctor, let me ask you a question if I can. And the question has to do with AI. And it works upon data sets, and they use these algorithms to reach conclusions based upon the data sets. Now, let us suppose, using the same data set and the same algorithms, one group wants to go through that data set and find out the people that are most likely, that haven't voted in the past, to go to the polls and vote for the Catholic position on abortion. Another group, same algorithms and things like that, go through the data sets and want to find a group that is going to be completely for abortion at any stage. Now the question is, number one, is one ethical and one isn't ethical? And the second part of that question is, who determines which is ethical and which isn't? Is it the majority? Is it the minority? What do you do in that particular kind of situation?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. That's a fabulous question. It's an old chestnut of a question that has got, it's got a lot of traction because of what AI ethics does to it. In other words, it's an old problem, but it's now skating along the surface at huge speed because of what AI ethics does. So there's basically 2 pieces that I would want to mention. First of all, is not to underestimate that AI ethics is going to escalate and hypercharge the old debate. So if you're talking about an election, abortion yay or abortion no, they're going to be escalated. And we shouldn't be surprised by that. We already see that in, for example, in recent elections. We see that AI ethics has become very dominant and very powerful. And there's probably nothing wrong with that. That's just about social media taking a more powerful role, and society is just going to have to learn to navigate that and make sure there's fair play and proper voices and representation. Your second point, however, is a much more important point. And that is, how do you adjudicate it? Is it a majority, the majority vote somebody in and that's it? It cannot be that, because look at what's going on in China. China is using its AI ethics capacity to be quite tyrannical on major aspects of its population, some of them ethnic, some of them not. And it's not to be underestimated how much of that tyranny is escalating and being, serving the tyrant more in terms of the power to the tyrant because of the capacity of AI ethics to track people. So the question is really important. Now, the only answer that I can say on this is a very big terrain, and it's very thin ice. You can fall through that ice in many, many ways. So I have only one concept that I can hold in myself, my own imagination gives me faith and certainty about. And that is where we need religion. Now, I'm not just talking about Catholicism, but I am a Catholic and I love the Catholic tradition, so I can celebrate Catholicism. But we definitely need religion because religion gives us that capacity to see big pictures broader than just us. It sees it either as a planetary phenomenon or beyond the planetary phenomenon and so on. Because remember, for example, the Catholic tradition, let's use our imagination here. We think of the human being and all the planetary diversity on our planets. When was the last time you thought of angels? God created angels. They exist. They are there. It's a super planetary phenomenon. It's part of God's magnificence and mystery of creation. So the one thing I am very confident about is the Catholic tradition to work through these things eventually. It's not always going to get things done immediately or even right first time. The church often does muddle through, but the church is tenacious. It will not run from science. It's not afraid of facts. It's not terrified by input from all sorts of people who disagree with it. It welcomes voices, welcomes dissonance, and adjudicates it as fairly as possible. So the only answer I would give you, Jack, that gives me a sense of comfort is that the Catholic tradition on these matters is very stable. It tends to be quite transparent, which, I always look for. You know where its teachings are coming from, why they're there, who's explaining them. They apply to everybody. There's not sort of leverages for you and me. And also that they're very deliberative and thoughtful, that generate results based on not just decades, but centuries of teaching and insight and wisdom. So that's how I would adjudicate it. It's certainly not by majority vote, but we do need guidance. And I think religion is a great source of that wisdom because it brings generations to the issue.
Wise words there. We probably only have a handful of minutes left. I wanted to ask the three remaining people if they feel like their questions have been answered. We have questions written down from Jim McCarville and Andrea and Anthony Gallagher and also Keith Collenberg. Would one of you want to chip in? This may be our last opportunity for a question. Maybe we can squeeze in one or two more. Jim, Andrea, Anthony, Keith?
Yes, hi, this is Anthony Gallagher. I wrote the question in, thank you. I wanted to thank Dr. Gerald. It was a great and enlightening presentation. I really enjoyed it. One point that you kept making, though, it just troubled me a little about that you kept repeating that we may destroy ourselves through climate change or through the pandemics and so forth. I heard St. John Paul say that divine mercy places a constraint on evil. And divine mercy, I don't believe, will allow us to destroy ourselves through climate change or pandemics, because Jesus will come again and there will be people when Jesus comes again. So there will remain people. We won't destroy ourselves. A question that I wanted to ask you about the current Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. The mRNA technology is very new, and you said that 10 years ago it was even left out of the room. I've been wondering, how can we have assurances that there are no long-term side effects? Have you heard of anything about those lines, about any research done about the long-term side effects of mRNA vaccines?
Right. So that little phrase, the question was after saying mRNA vaccines, that's the messenger, RNA that delivers the vaccine to the right spot in the body, works, it delivers the proper DNA. So it's a messenger, it's a way of delivery. And it's so novel. This is the first time we've been using these vaccines on such a large scale. So we've got a lot to learn. And I think it would be very foolish for anyone to say at this stage that there are not going to be side effects. I don't doubt that there are, but one thing we do know is that there are side effects at the extreme level. And by definition, any vaccine is going to have that. Even the simplest of vaccines has that at the extreme level. What we're talking about are side effects that could be fairly common or widespread across a population. We have to monitor that. Now, the good news about this is that that's what the government does. Remember, these vaccines are under emergency approval. They are not approved vaccines. They're under emergency approval because of this real danger that we are in. And once they'll take a good bit of time and data from all of the vaccines and the population returns for us to get the data to say, yes, they are now totally safe and fully approved. But even when they become fully approved, they're still going to have side effects. And that's called longitudinal study. And so when a vaccine is approved, it goes through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials, and then goes to the population. It doesn't have to always go through emergency approval, but before it gets FDA approval, it can be a long, long time between phase 3 and the population distribution. But once you get to population distribution, you then go into longitudinal studies, which go out for 20 years to manage and control and observe everything so that we learn as much as we possibly can. And all we can do there is rely on science. The church asks us to rely on science, to be cognizant of the dangers of burden and benefit analysis, but at the end of the day, to advance the human condition, to advance the planetary condition by the science that God really built in. God built the code in. We talk about data analytics. God put that code into the creation that was made for us. And that code is revealed through science, through technology, through medicine, and so on. So yes, that's a good question. So thank you for that.
Jim.
Well, let me. You've answered most of my question, but you began with such a wonderful, positive exposition about the technology, the benefits, and the embrace of the church. But you also mentioned that, well, it's technology, it's our creeping capitalism, our invasion of the planet that is doing this. How do we? I'm sorry. Pope Francis writes extensively about not trusting technology, and its combination with capitalism and how we've gotten into this. And where are the red flags? How do we identify what not to buy into?
Right. So this is where Pope Francis is very good. He is very aware of the downsides of any aspect of the human condition. He knows that there is sin. He knows that there is the fall. He knows there's original sin. So he recognizes that, and at the same time wants to build forward. So as he builds forward on technology and AI ethics, he says, yes, but we have to check it. We have to monitor it. We have to make sure it's being used for the proper purposes. So Francis is not a blind loyalist to AI ethics. That's called the technological imperative. That's a heresy. Because you can do it, you must do it. He's not that. He says, no, God gave us the earth. He gave us the code of the earth, of the planet, of the human condition. Let's decode it. Let's, through nature, understand. Let's use science to build the technology in a manner that will safeguard and promote human flourishing. And then he says, here is how you do it. And that's the two pieces that I've tried to tell you. He focuses on the individual dignity and vulnerability, and he focuses on the planet simultaneously, both brought together. And by the way, the earlier question about, when Christ comes at the end of time, as revealed in the scriptures, and celebrates the humans left on the planet, I wouldn't like to, second guess what the speaker was saying. That might be more or less humans when that happens. We just want to make sure that we honor the mandate that Christ gave us. You can do better than I did. You can do far greater things than I have achieved. But Christ also knew the fall, and he knew the capacity for evil. And he condemned it in his life. He died for it. He gave us redemption to come away from our fallen nature. And that's why I wanted to use the imagination about original sin, is that I think we would be remiss to think original sin as a function of our past, of the past of the species, of Adam and Eve. Original sin may very well be an indicator of what we can do in the future in a destructive and self-centered manner.
I'm hoping that we can have one more question. It's the last one that's been written into the chat box from Keith Kallenberg. Would you like to ask it yourself, Keith?
Yeah, sure. Let me give it a try. I've got a 3-year-old here who's accompanying me, but let me give it a shot. Dr. McGill, yeah, I was interested in your perspective on end of life issues. You know, a controversial use of AI that's come up has been mortality prediction, being able to predict from EMR data when somebody might die, maybe to prioritize palliative care or something along those lines. And so it might be kind of obvious that might be something that would raise red flags for people. But I guess I wanted to just ask whether this was really so different from, I mean, I guess the ability to do this with any accuracy is scary. Like if that causes, you know, if our ability has really increased in that realm. But I guess I just wonder if the situation is so different from the analytics and right. practices that have been done in the past.
Yeah, so let me again be optimistic on this, based on the great Catholic tradition that science and technology and medicine can work out for the good and can help humans flourish and the planet flourish and celebrate and honor the name of God at the Imago Dei. One great buzzword that's going to be the beneficiary of AI technology in healthcare, especially generational wise, in the near future is going to be regenerative medicine. What AI is enabling regenerative medicine to do and move forward is quite remarkable. In other words, we all remember the first heart transplant. I mean, it seems that, you know, a lifetime ago it wasn't. It was an amazing thing. But can you think that in the future we will not need a heart transplant? That the whole point of regenerative medicine is to identify through AI technology early on, through the combination of AI and genetics, early on those diseases, those traits, and then to start delivering medicines that prevent those ailments beginning and developing, so that the idea of a heart replacement will be seen to be an odd phenomenon of the early 21st century. Future generations will say, wow, they just didn't take the pill, you know, that would solve the problems with those valves. I mean, there's a little yellow tablet, that's all they had to do. Well, the yellow tablet didn't exist at that time. And as an aside of regenerative medicine, there's a very big department at the NIH, and most people don't know about. It's a huge department, and it's the Department of Gerontology, aging. Because the government's very attentive to the fact that the aging is going to increase dramatically. The quality of life, are going to live longer. Remember, the people who are alive now watching this, those of you who are 60, 70 plus, your lifespan, you got a second life. In your generation, you got a second life. You know, when you were born, the lifespan was half that age. In the United States, we've doubled our lifespan in our lives. And they're anticipating that going on through AI technology and regenerative medicine. And what that doesn't mean to say we're going to live to we're 120, feeble and old and sick. It just means we're going to age much more slowly. You know, that phrase when you say the 70s is the new 50s, there's a lot of truth in that, because the 70-year-old person today is as healthy as a 50-year-old person was a generation ago. So that AI technology is going to be a big player in terms of regenerative medicine, and the people who are going to be at the front end, the beneficiaries of that, are going to be the elderly population, because they can stretch a little few more years. There may be a lot more 100-year-olds, you know, coming down the pipe fairly soon. But the real beneficiary is going to be a younger population, because their age, as they grow older, their aging process is going to go slower. It's that old story: if you fly off to Mars, and then you go beyond Mars to out of the galaxy and come back using Einstein's theory of general relativity and so on. And you leave your brother, and your brother's 20, and when you come back 40 years later, your brother's 60 and you're 40. It's just one of those strange things of how time warps age. And gerontology is about that, and AI technology is going to be a huge aspect of regenerative medicine. That's maybe sliding off your question, but I want to have an optimistic little pace, or a little message at the end that AI might very well give us a longer and happier life.
That was great. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I think we all do. You're making it very relevant to all of this. Like, we're all interested in having good health. Well, thank you very much, Dr. McGill. It's been such a rich evening, full of a variety of topics that many of us, I think, would be curious about already, and many more that we're now probably curious about delving into. On that note, we can, all of us, review this evening because it has been recorded, and it will be up for review on our Facebook page and then on the website. So keep that in mind. Also, remember that at the very top of the chat, or close to the top, is a series of questions, a survey that will help St. Jude Parish to make these presentations ever better. If you could give us your feedback, we'd be very grateful for that. We take all of your comments very closely into consideration. And at this point, I'd like to hand it back to Mary Lou.
Oh, well, thanks, Rob, and thanks, Andy, for doing such a great job getting the questions to Dr. McGill. And Dr. McGill, I can't begin to thank you, first of all, for answering my email in January. That was truly a gift. And now for gerontology. I'm a regenerative medicine. You really ended on a high note for those of us who are, if we want to come back.
Me included.
Yes. But I just thank you from the bottom of my heart for this incredible hour, for sharing your expertise and your time with us. And you truly are a gentleman and a scholar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.